From our perspective, banking is a universal activity, or it's a global activity. All societies have it, all countries have it, and banks will swear that they're completely different than any other bank, but in essence, they are pretty similar at that fundamental level.
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Vacuum podcast, in which we tell war stories of people founding fintechs and tech companies working in the vacuum of space and time to build something cool. Today, I'm really happy to have Paul Taylor, the CEO of Thought Machine, here. First of all, thank you for coming on and accepting the invitation. It's a real pleasure to have you here. But let's get straight to the point. When people come around and ask you what is Thought Machine, what do you tell them?
Well, it's very, very quick. I will just say we are curing banks of their legacy IT problems and producing new banking infrastructure that works in the cloud. That would assume that people know what the cloud is, but I think that's a relatively safe assumption these days. If I was going to go a little further, I would talk about the revolution that's happening in banking with digital challenger banks and the likes of Monzo and Revolut and N26 and things like this. And I would say that there's a revolution in the technology that these banks are bringing, cloud native technology. And what are the established banks going to do in reply? The answer is Thought Machine, that we build cloud native modern platforms and sell to established banks so that they can join the modern world and get all the benefits of the cloud.
So it's really about bringing on the next age of core banking. Is that the right category?
Yes. If you want to talk about the problem that's being solved or the point of pain, banks have not kept up with best practices in technology. And they were probably fine until the mid-90s. But since the internet has really taken off at strength, and then the cloud, the big tech giants, Google, Amazon in particular, have revolutionized the way that computing works over the internet. And that they were kind of, whereas banks stayed with mainframe technology and had all the data centers on premise and owned and controlled by themselves. And these were kind of running in parallel as reasonable contenders. But I think about between 5 and 10 years ago, the banks, it's clear that they've taken the wrong path and that the accelerated development in the cloud just kind of leaves them far behind. And it becomes more and more difficult. They run on mainframes, they have problems with outages and uptime. And of course, the modern consumer wants a digital only experience in many, many cases. All these things become harder and harder and harder to produce. So if they want to keep up, if they want to have all the benefits of the modern technology, we're offering this new platform that's in the cloud. And alluded to what you say, the most important or the starting point of that is the so-called core banking engine. And the core banking engine is the bit that kind of runs the financial part of the bank. It stores all the transactions and it calculates interest. And it's one bit that runs, savings accounts and personal loans and mortgages. Around that are many, many other parts of the bank, but it is the basic mechanics of the bank. And so we start there. That's the first thing we build. And then the bank kind of elaborates on that and builds a bigger bank on top.
So is the big vision to go beyond that? So it's just not the core banking system, but actually building out a broader engine?
In the long term, it most definitely is. So we're probably doing between 10 and 20% of a bank's tech needs today. Right. And that's not bad, but they still have to go to partners and build stuff themselves. So we've got a great partnership network and we're very happy to work with our partners. So it's not about eating into their turf, but there's lots and lots of parts of the banking puzzle which aren't really well served by cloud native vendors such as ourselves, and banks still have to do a lot of work. So eventually we want to get the whole thing built and mature and complete to such an extent where the bank can quickly and effortlessly build their own bank from scratch. Also, we are mostly focusing on retail banks today. Retail banks is the bit that gets all the attention, but there's lots of other types of banking. So in the fullness of time, we'll move into those other types of banking. And such as, so a large, for example, Lloyd's is one of our customers, and a large tier one bank that deals with large multinational corporations all the way down to kind of teenagers saving for the first time. And our goal is to serve all those customer needs.
Yeah, so you mentioned Lloyd's. You were also working with Atom, if I remember correctly, SEB in Sweden. But I think the most interesting one is the one that we've worked on most recently, which is Mox over in Hong Kong.
Yes.
So that's a really cool proposition. I mean, you're jumping all the way from the UK all the way to Hong Kong to kickstart a bank over there. How did that feel when you won that?
That one felt great. So let me give you a bit of background there. So the Hong Kong Markets Authority, I guess about 2 years ago, announced that it was going to give out, or award, sorry, I think it's the word, award a set of digital-only banking licenses. And I believe that the first regulator to really do this. So in the UK, what happened was, 5-6 years ago, the UK regulator decided that there wasn't enough competition in banking. So because there wasn't enough competition in banking, it was going to issue new banking licenses, something that hadn't happened in a very long time. So it did that, and it's a great example of a kind of an initiative working. We live in a world where too many public sector or government initiatives don't work, but it did work because we now have a rich culture of challenger banks in the UK, and that has then spawned a kind of a further wave. The Hong Kong Markets Authority decided to actually just, why do this general step? Why not just go, straight in? So it decided to issue a bunch of digital banking licenses, and basically saying there's no point in some established company taking up one of these new licenses and then just becoming an old bank. So the idea was to leapfrog all the technology, make it digital only, mobile only, and do it from that. It's proved to be a very interesting space. Lots of big tech names have come in, lots of big banking names have come in, lots of entrepreneurs have come in. But our partnership was with Standard Chartered, and through Standard Chartered, that created the bank that was called Mox. And Standard Chartered were very, very forward-thinking in their views on this. They knew they needed to move at speed. They knew they needed to have the best platform there. They knew that using the main bank platform wasn't a great idea. So they created a team out there, which, as I said, became the Mox team, and then had a bunch of partners in there. We were one of the partners. And over the course of, I guess, the last 18 months, we've been building that bank with them. Initially, we were deeply involved in every aspect of it. But of course, our work there tails off, and then the bank ends up doing all the things that are more like to do with customer proposition and marketing and so on. But it's it was publicly launched a while ago, gaining traction, and now I believe in an open beta stage of development, and I think it's very exciting times.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of that team that initially went and met up with you guys back in November 2018. Yeah, probably at this point. Yes.
I think that was the start of it. Yeah.
Yes, and that was way back in that day, and this was us in a room figuring things out. How do we build this within this new sort of space in Hong Kong? Nobody has issued licenses like this before. How does this work? So this was a very exciting time, and I think the whole thing is just such a unique opportunity now that we're sort of moving beyond the phase of sort of the traditional legacy technology into the cloud. AWS, Google Cloud, all of these are now becoming more and more available around the world, and having the power of that cloud-based core banking system or core banking engine is really a big shift. So this is back in the days with Will, your CTO, when you were starting up Thought Machine. What were those days like? What were you thinking about? What were the big challenges that you wanted to overcome to become the next big thing in core banking and core technology? What was that big thing that you were driving towards?
Yes, well, to take a step back, so I had been working in speech technology prior to doing this, and then my last company was acquired by Google, and I ran the Google Speech Group in London, and we produced the Google text-to-speech system, which you hear in car driving directions, and my Wi-Fi now speaks to me with that voice. Part of me was always saying, why did Google buy my company instead of my company buy Google? And I think it's no secret to say, but it was good to see it at first hand, that the best Silicon Valley companies that want to handle problems that scale, and they want to do things that have mass market appeal, and they want to do things where technology can really make a big difference. They don't want to do things where it's just a nice to have. And I spent a long time looking at this. I was very interested in Uber when they started, because I kind of thought nobody had really thought there's much money in taxis. And Uber kind of cracked a particular type of business model and showed that actually there's a lot of money in taxis if you do it right. So this thought process was leading me to what is an area that is kind of somewhat undiscovered and neglected, to which has a mass market, is an enormous market where a lot of people use, and where we can add an advantage. So when we started Thought Machine, we were very interested in fintech, because being in London, it was somewhat the natural thing to do. And we spent a year or so looking at different things and trying experimenting things and having a look. But the problem that drew us further more and more was the issue of core banking, because we just saw that all the other fintechs who kind of operated around the provided additional services to the banks, such as FX or payments or cards or personal spending or KYC or credit scoring, All of them had to communicate with the core banking engine, and that was always painful, and it always held them back. So we thought, well, we were having the same problem. So why, instead of that, why don't we build a core banking engine in the cloud? So we realized that this would be difficult because it's like building the foundation of a house. It's difficult to build once the house is built, whereas, for example, it's a more reasonable proposition. But we also thought that if we could do this and fix this properly, this would really be the kind of the killer feature. This would really solve the core problem in the bank. Now, Will had worked in AdSense, the part of Google that does online advertising auctions. So he was not afraid of high volume traffic, databases, distributed customers around the world, and things like this. So even though none of us worked in banking before, we weren't coming into this as if this is completely crazy. Transaction processing to a certain extent is the same. It doesn't matter really the nature of the transaction. So we were confident that we had the skills in terms of the core database technology layer and how to build microservice architecture and how to build things in the cloud. And then we gradually taught ourselves core banking. It turned out to be a bit more complicated than we first thought, but our naivety also served as well, because we said, well, surely what's the difference between deposits and loans? And the answer is one's just the flip side of the other. And therefore, we've got a single system in our core engine, Vault, that deals with mortgages, credit cards, personal loans, savings accounts. The whole thing is done in a single framework. And I think our pure engineering product design approach made that path natural. Whereas you've worked in the bank, that approach is less natural. You think very vertically in a bank that personal loan requires a credit check, and then it requires this, and then it requires that. And a mortgage is a completely different thing, and then a savings account is a completely different thing. And then you produce these kind of vertical silos within the bank where the technology aligns. Whereas our approach, I think, was very much horizontal, that if it's very functional. So if something happens at a bank, it happens once in our core banking engine. So for example, all the products operate in one way, all the payments operate in a single way, and this just creates a vastly simpler system at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's about really coming back to those first principles thinking. Is like, well, there's lots of workflows in a bank, but they're all workflows. So abstracting that away into something that is not necessarily unique for every single department or every single one of these silos, but rather generic, and then just applied or designed for the specific product, is really something that from the early days we saw that made sense. That was something that wasn't designed by bankers. It was designed by somebody who was thinking about it. How would I design this the most efficient way or the simplest way possible? Was there something in that process where you, either due to the regulatory reasons or other reasons that the industry has specific in it, where you wanted to do something in a simple way, but rather had to do it in a much more complex or different way?
Not when it comes to the core nature of the bank, no. In the inside of our system, just like an operating system, we've got a system called the kernel. And the kernel is the pure part of the core banking engine. And that is designed the way we want. I mean, as we go in time, we think of even more and more improvements. But that is a pretty pure design, and there's very little that's held back. But we deliberately said, if we allow all the kind of details and all the undesirable complexity of the banking ecosystem to eat into the inside of the system, we'll have lost. So we build a pure system, and then we've got various layers on the outside of that. But for example, the way we do payments in Vault, we've got a system called the Payments Hub. Now, if you can imagine, one side of the Payments Hub talks to the kernel, and for every payment, debit or credit, in or out, that is exactly the same call, right? So it doesn't really matter how that started. At the other end of the Payments Hub, we connect to payment schemes, which are all different. I mean, there's some similarities. Another part will talk to Visa, another part will talk to MasterCard. But the important thing is that the inside of the system is insulated from the specific details of this. And this is what keeps the system kind of tractable and sane. If you think about a bank, has kind of got necessary complexity and then accidental complexity. So the necessary complexity is about making sure nothing ever goes wrong, making sure the transactions are very safe, making sure everything's very fast, making sure that everything is very flexible. The unnecessary complexity is, the world really only needs one real-time payment system. We standardize on lots of other protocols for email and for text messages and things like that. It's a long struggle to get the banking industry to standardize on messaging formats. So because of that, we have to spend time on this accidental complexity on the outside of the system. But so far, it hasn't hampered the core design philosophy.
Yeah, so it's about plugging in what you need, and you keep that complexity in that plugin or adapter, if you will, to make it happen? Because it could be, if you're working in the UK, it's going to be very different than working, say, in Hong Kong, right?
I think that's an interesting debating point. I mean, from our perspective, banking is a universal activity, or it's a global activity. All societies have it, all countries have it, and banks will swear that they're completely different than any other bank. But in essence, they are lending money, they're taking deposits, they're creating money, they're assessing risk, and they're all pretty similar at that fundamental level. So if you think about our technology, it's very focused on those fundamental tasks of the bank: storing money, moving money, creating money. And that if you do those well, you find out you've got a set of features which are very, very aligned with the bank's needs. But as I said, the complexities of particular markets differ. I mean, mostly it is to do with connection into things like payment rails or local credit bureaus or things like that. Occasionally, you do see that there's a kind of product specialization or particular culture, but normally that's relatively digestible compared to the whole size of the bank. So you find in one country mortgages are done in a particular way, and in another country they're done slightly differently. But it's from a software point of view, these are relatively small differences.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really like the payments, the types of networks, the card networks that might be prominent more in certain parts of the world, or ATMs like Jetcos over in different parts of the world. So yeah, this changes, and then for the insides of the products themselves, you develop what is now, it's a fairly popular term, but that's really smart contracts, right? So this is about designing the product in a way that is in line with whatever the complexity of the bank requires. So you sort of touched on it, but how does a person who, for most of their career, working in speech and speech synthesis and like anything to do with speech, and you found two different companies doing that, how do you shift from that? Is it just the that you saw banking as that next big thing, or was there something leading you in that journey towards banking?
Well, I think there's different aspects to this. I've been doing speech a very long time. And when we launched the Google Text-to-Speech system in 2012, it was incredibly successful. It gained a huge amount of traffic and a huge amount of interest. It really was at the high point of that. And for the next 18 months, I was kind of coasting downhill. I really thought you've only got one life, you only got one career. It's time to do something different. So I decided to do something different before I decided what the different thing was. But I also thought that in my previous two companies, I was effectively the CEO and the CTO and the chief architect and the chief algorithm writer. And I actually found that quite frustrating because I was the most knowledgeable person about the domain that we were dealing with. And it was always a struggle to get people up to speed about how things worked. And even in the Google text-to-speech system, there's this level of magic where I was one of the very, very few people who knew how it worked. And so it's not scalable in that sense. What's great about Thought Machine is it is a well-defined and understood problem. We've just been doing it badly. So it's a different type of problem that we'll have to solve. The issue is doing it well. And I have many, many other excellent software engineers in Thought Machine. And it's a much more balanced kind of dynamic in work to allow them to do the technical stuff. And I take care of the strategy and the vision and the investment and things like that. So it's a much happier team because everyone's got their expertise. And the software engineers in Thought Machine will certainly say that they're better software than I am, and will probably say they're better software than I am by a very long way. Yeah, but the issue is, how do you bridge the gaps? So obviously I do not have the same level of domain knowledge that I had in speech. Arguably, I've done it 20 years. I was probably one of the top people in the world on the subject, and certainly not in banking. But it is just applying the lessons that I learned in Google about how to build highly scalable systems, and the lessons of a lifetime in terms of complexity. Just what you alluded to a minute ago. The key art in software design is how to make the system very flexible, very configurable, but without changing the software. So people talk about no-code configuration and things like that. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. But can you build a very, very, very configurable system without changing the code? And in the speech system, we did that because we were doing lots of different languages and lots of different voices, and we could do all that without having any differences in the source code. So that always had me thinking about how to build a modular bank and how to build a bank whereby you can have all the desirable complexity and the banking products you want. You wouldn't think very much of me if I sold you a text-to-speech system and said it can do English, it can do French, it can do German, but no, it can't do Italian. Sorry, ever. You wouldn't be very impressed. All these design thoughts go through your head. And as an engineer, and as an entrepreneur, you're always looking at the world and learning and seeing, what can be done better. And certainly what's fascinating about banking is that it is in essence a very simple problem. And you can allude to that because it's been done by centuries. It's not a new industry. So it has been done successfully before. So the question is, why do we have all this complex technology when we could run banks which didn't have all the complex technology? Of course, the old banks weren't run with anywhere near the degree of efficiency in terms of use of their assets and their capital as bank is today. But even so, it's still a fascinating issue. So put all that together, and in my own mind, it's not as big a jump as it may appear. A bigger jump really is the fact that it's not the technical challenge that seems bigger. It's the fact that you're selling to a new industry, which means you have to learn the culture and you have to learn who's who in the new industry, and that's actually been taking longer to do than kind of understand the technical nature of the problem. At some level, technology, the use case can be abstracted away, and you can just focus on the architecture.
Yeah, but I mean, you're working with fairly established brands and banks like Lloyd's and SCB. Like these guys have been around for decades, right? So you are coming in with this new technology, which is very different in how it approaches. It's very different from the mainframes or mainframe kind of core banking systems that were built, was it 30 years ago, 40 years ago, more? Probably 40 at this point. So why do you think that this has sort of not come about sooner? Because the cloud it's not like entirely new. Like it's something that has been operating for years. So why is it that the shift hasn't been moving towards this for longer?
I think that's a good question. I mean, the simple answer is that I think banks thought that they could keep on going and that they could stay in their quotes unique position and get away with it. That they thought that they didn't really have to do it. There's an unfortunate feeling in banks whereby it's easier to stick with today's system, undergo all the change necessary for something new. So I think that's dominant. The problem is that they've been caught out in a way because the gap between the technology has just been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And furthermore, that there is no non-cloud technology in the world anymore. There's no one who builds data centers from scratch. It just doesn't happen. So everything that's new is going in the cloud. So therefore, instead of the cloud being this new thing that was over there, we now find that it is everything apart from banking. And how are banks going to keep going? Where are they going to find the people with the technical ability to run those data centers with the mainframes and all these sort of things? It's not credible. So the change has to come. And I think the things that have made it happen right now are the increase in cloud computing in general. The cloud computing companies have started to become very regulator friendly. So they were somewhat dismissive of regulator and bank concerns, issues about data localization and things like that. And now I take those very seriously. They realize that they're going to sell the banks, they have to do that. Competition from the challenger banks who are of course cloud native, and it just changes in user expectations as to what an experience it is to be. You expect the bank to be on 24/7, expect everything to work in real time if necessary. So all those pressures together add up to the bank. All those things add up to the bank having to move now.
So how does this differ for like retail banks versus more SME or corporate focused banks? You said that you're now currently focusing more on retail. Do you think there'll be bigger changes to either Thought Machine's Vault or any of the core technology as you move into that space? Or is it more of just a sales opportunities and growth kind of thing where you're now focusing on retail?
Yeah, it's the second one, really. When you've built a retail bank properly, that SME banking really is a very small step. And in fact, most banks use the same platform for the retail bank as they do for the SME bank. So there's no particular challenges there. But it is really just about commercial focus and doing one thing at a time. The banking industry is vast. Thought Machine is getting pretty big, 350 people now, and it's getting bigger every day. But even so, we have to have focuses on retail banking. But starting in 12 months time, 18 months time, we're very excited about moving into commercial banking, corporate banking, because all the same problems are there. But people are doing trade finance, letters of credit, still bits of paper moving around. There's still all sorts of crazy things. It's not real time. It's not safe. So yeah, we'll get there eventually, but it makes sense to go in a particular order.
Absolutely. Jumping to a slightly different topic, although very relevant today, How has the whole situation with COVID and stay at home impacted the way you operate as a business?
We went into lockdown just like everybody else, kind of at some time in March. But I mean, obviously, we're a cloud computing company, so there was very little physical infrastructure work. We'd taken the preemptive thing of ordering a couple of hundred laptops beforehand just to make sure that everybody was covered. And sure enough, and within a week or so, I think everyone was up to speed. For us, that wasn't too difficult. We, like everyone else, we're doing Zoom calls, we're doing Google Hangouts and stuff like that, and all that's been fine. Certainly, it took a while to get there, and people are pretty good in terms of the routine work and the things that they have to do and the kind of the quotes the day job. People are now missing the casual interaction side of work, which of course is isn't just about social activity. It's about getting ideas out there and keeping abreast of all the developments in the company. I'd say when it comes to the customers, I mean, like everyone else, everyone had a big intake of breath in the middle of March and decided what they're going to do. So there was a lot of thinking in the banks, but all that's over now, and the business activity is very, very high indeed. In fact, we've accelerated the growth plans for 2020 quite considerably because the business is there. But a big driver of that is that banks, the COVID crisis has made them yet again re-examine their infrastructure and their ability to work. And of course, the cloud is a huge part of the answer to that. And because of that, we've now got accelerated commercial activity. Now, of course, we've been saying these things for a long time, but it's nothing like a real world event that kind of goads people into action. So there's a lot of positive activity from that.
Yeah, I've talked to friends at various companies where they used to have like physical work trips, going to other countries or going traveling across the country to meet people, and now they've realized like it's actually much more convenient to just jump on a call with somebody, even if that's a client, and that client actually appreciates us more and more as well because now they have more time to deal with whatever it is that they're going through. And of course, we won't replace this permanently, or we won't replace this as like we still be traveling after this. But the way we're looking at it as a company, we don't expect any major travel to happen this year at all. And next year is going to be like a very slow start. Like I'm hoping to get one trip in, but I don't want to get sick either. So it was just before COVID hit that I was about to fly out on a conference over to London, and like since then it's been at home basically the whole time.
Yeah, banks are very keen to have lots of people on projects working on site, contractors and vendors, and that's always been a stretch for us. So that in particular is highly welcome because it means that our team can work in this stable environment. There's very little travel involved, and that they're not kind of cut off from the main company here. So certainly that's a lot more efficient, and I think if it is surprising how well Zoom and everything else, how well it does adapt, and you do get there. So I think for many parts of this project work, it'll be there. It's still too functional, and there's always that time when you go for a coffee or go for lunch, you go for a beer with somebody, and then you really kind of unwind and you talk about the problem. So all those things are missing. But that's perhaps 10 or 20% of the work of the time available. And certainly, for the people who are, quotes, on the road all the time, it is wonderful. It's people get more sleep, people get more work done, get to see a bit of the families, which is highly welcome, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess, getting to see your family a lot more if you're used to traveling a lot. I think that's great for all those people because although I know a lot of them are now really itching to get out on the roads just because they have that drive. They need to have those meetings, have that beer after a conference and that sort of thing. So that's just really, really...
The lack of conferences is a real shame. As you know, Money 2020 was scheduled for June, and that's postponed. And those are fantastic networking opportunities. It's good to get a bit of a buzz. So I hope all that comes back. You're not going to get a Zoom call of 4,000 people just in case you bump into somebody who's interesting. But so I do miss it. Like everyone else, I'm a responsible person and want the lockdown to have the desired health effects it is. But I'd love to get out there if I could.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back at sort of the journey so far with TM, is there something that you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, we'll put it this way. If you can't reflect on, in an ideal world, of course, if you can't reflect on what's happened and what you'd improve, then that's a poor way of thinking. So there's always things you could have done better. I think one thing was we didn't commit to building the core banking as our only product for quite some time. And I think it was really just as the end of 2017 when we said, right, this is it, nothing else. And I could have been braver in making that decision. Of course, it turned out to be completely the right decision, but there was still too many people going, it's all very exciting. Are the big banks going to move to the cloud? But of course, everyone's moving to the cloud now. So that big objection was taken away. But generally, no. I think we got most of the big things right that we did right. But we have retrospectives on lots of activities in the company. And all the time we go, could we have done this better? Every release, every meeting, every feature. But we're always in that learning experience. But nothing of that interesting to your listeners, to be perfectly frank. It's all about continuous improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, because one thing that I really found interesting when I visited your booth, I think this was Singapore, you guys were showcasing like your like little games division, which is like Thought Machine and Labs. I think that's the right name, at least.
Well, it's not actually called Cauldrons. It's got its own complete unique brand. Yes, but continue anyway.
So how does that even happen? I'm a massive gamer. I've been all my life. That's been sort of it's a huge part of my identity, and I try to bring in games into anything I can, at least in some way. How did that come about within Thought Machine? Was that a specific person pioneering that, or leading that, or was that somehow strategic? How did that come about?
It came about, it was a very fortunate and very happy kind of chance occurrence, really. So Mark Warwick, who's the Chief Design Officer of Thought Machine, he's hugely talented and led he's been involved in many aspects of banking, but he's also ran a creative agency. And we were always talking about, could we do something more, to want of a better word, creative in the company? And we always had a creative team in Thought Machine, but they were often doing relatively straightforward things like designing logos or brochures or websites, I think. But I can't remember what it was when, but maybe 2.5 years ago, that we said that we should really make a special team for this. The core banking platform is all very well, but it's a big kind of project that has to go at a certain speed and has to have all the issues with scalability there. So the idea was, could we have a small team that would be able to build banking products for the future? So they're always going to work in the Thought Machine technology, but the idea was maybe just brainstorm a bit and come up with something that feels unique and feels different. So that's where originally Thought Machine Labs, but secondly Cauldron was developed. And then they went from a phase of designing it to say, well, we're really going to build it too. So design it and build it. But it all sits on top of Vault technology, and it all proves that the smart contract system within Vault is a very, very powerful system. It proves that all the things that they can do in terms of gamification or in terms of physical objects to interact with, all of that can run off our platform without us having to change the platform itself. So it's a good test. But while we will never be a kind of an end-to-end customer proposition style company, it's good to show that we've got people in the company who are thinking about that, and people in the company who have not afraid to do something different. Some banks are happy just with the platform, but other banks love the team and are very happy to engage and really want to see how it can be done differently. But as I say, I think the thing that really makes it stand out is the fact that they've built the technology, and the technology works with Thought Machine. There are far too many Bank of the Future style concepts, which are just effectively just mock-ups and videos and things like that. But it actually works, and it's actually being built.
Yeah, and I was talking to your marketing team about talking to Mark as well, so I'm really keen on picking his brain and how his thinking was behind that. It's just
He'd be a good guest, and he's very good. He'd be much better at me at explaining the vision of the whole thing.
exciting. Are you yourself a gamer, or have you engaged in games yourself?
No, let me say, when I learned to code as a teenager, I wrote a couple of basic games, but I was just average for a teenager. But this is in the 80s. I mean, we're talking about pretty simple games. But I've always wanted to be the person who writes the software. So as soon as I got into games, of course, I never produced anything that was very good. But producing a good game is as you know, as you're well aware of, the market is very, very high. But I always wanted to be the creator.
And you've created Thought Machine.
Yes, and people think it's funny, but I don't think creating a company is any different really from creating a piece of software. I mean, you've got different modules and you want them to work together and you want to make it all work, all there. We put tremendous pride in Thought Machine being a happy company and a great place to work. But again, I mean, that's something that takes experience and dedication and energy. So it's a skill set that you develop and then you apply to the structure of the organization and then the company for itself, and then hope for the best outcome.
Absolutely. So really, many people argue it's not the products that make the company, but it's the actual company in and of itself is the product. It's the engine that powers the creation of those products that you sell as a company.
Yes, that is definitely true because we're rewriting the product all the time, so and improving it. So that's there. And of course, the market shifts, new competition arrives, new challenges come in, and your ability to react to those and kind of get on top of things is absolutely critical. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, I know you're very busy and I know you have to run. So I'd like to thank you so much for coming on. This was a very interesting conversation. I hope we get to have a beer sometime when I can travel to the UK again. And for those who want to find out more either about you or Thought Machine, where should they go?
Best place is the website, thoughtmachine.net.
Thoughtmachine.net. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Anything else you would like to say? Something I should have asked and didn't ask?
No, I think we covered a lot there. Okay, but thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm always happy to talk about Thought Machine to anyone who's prepared to listen. So thanks everyone.
I would like to thank everyone for listening. We're back soon with another war story from inside the vacuum.